Well, Dave, you and I have just come to a grinding halt in trying to figure out the Seahawks salary cap situation. We realize we have no idea what's happening there. So we got to bring in experts, people who know what's happening and what kind of moves can be made and should be made to get them back compliant with the salary cap. And we bring in the one expert we know, we love. He's been with us before. He's with us once again on the Emerald Queen Casino Sportsbook Hotline. You know his stuff at Spotrac.com. Michael Ginnitt is with us. How are you, man?
Doing well. It's good to be back here. You guys have some work to do on the Seattle Seahawks salary cap table.
Yeah, you know what's funny is we look at different websites. Obviously, we start with yours, and you've said before, Michael, that hey, man, I don't know every last dollar, the ins and outs, everything. This is kind of a, I don't know, rough estimate, if you will. But in looking, the one consistent theme we saw is that at the time there were 5 teams over the cap, Seahawks being one of them, and it seemed like they were consistently in the third worst spot ahead of the Browns and the Saints. Now, they just made a deal with Leonard Williams to restructure his deal. Did that move them out of that spot, as far as you know? Are they still in a bad place financially?
Still in the negatives, according to our numbers and according to what we're able to see through the league. So it's there's plenty more work to do. But certainly that Williams deal was a nice start here. That's a player that at least has 1 or 2 more guaranteed years that are left on his contract, so you want to make the moves you can make. But there's probably 2 or 3 significant moves just to get yourself ready for March 12th, right? Just to get yourself in a situation where you're active in free agency, and then certainly thinking about the draft pick signings down the road as well. So it's one of those situations we see with a lot of teams that are at this point of their iteration, their window, where there's a quarterback that's been paid and a couple of wide receivers and some defensive players. But now it's about who's going to be here for the long haul, at least for 2-3 years, to make some actual significant contract changes.
Hey, Michael, as far as the way that the Seahawks, they got rid of, Matt Thomas, and I think Joey Schneiders is doing some work there.
Right.
Yeah, so kind of tell us who, I mean, I know John is always a big part of it, but he has experts that are doing that. And what did you think about that move, first of all, and then, just the way that they're handling? Do you see anything different as far as their, what they're doing with their cap?
Yeah, that's a nice one. I think it's a little too early to see if there's new trends or new elements coming out from the contracts. I think the majority of the big fish contracts were sort of signed before this changed. And I'm sort of a proponent of new sets of eyes on this stuff as much as possible, whether that's consultants, whether that's bringing in people to sort of take over different roles with that stuff. So I think anytime you're adding additional resources in this regard, I can tell you right now, there are a lot of teams in the league that either have one person or maybe just allow kind of the GM and some assistants to do the work on this stuff. And I think we're at a point, and by the way, I'll bring the Eagles into this conversation, who maybe have the most complicated, aggressive salary cap people in the world. We're at a point where this stuff matters to the nth degree, right? It's not just simple X's and O's anymore. You've got to be able to manipulate this stuff in a way that really makes it work for you. And I think the Seahawks are in sort of that window where there's a lot of subtraction, a lot of addition, and maybe some pieces that you want to extend this offseason. So I think it's good to have some fresh sets of eyes in there, and we'll see what kind of contract structures come out of it.
Michael, are there any tricks that every team doesn't know? Is there a team? You brought up the Eagles being aggressive. Are there? It feels like everybody is dealing with the same thing. They've got the same limits that everybody else has, and they know the loopholes. We'll call this a bonus. We'll transfer this. We'll push this back here. Whatever the maneuvers are. Are there teams that are finding new ways of doing it that maybe others hadn't thought of, or does everybody kind of have the same playbook when it comes to managing the salary cap?
There are definitely team trends, and that goes with, the longer-standing GMs and front offices that have sort of figured some things out and know what works for them and maybe just want to stop trying to, peg a square peg into a round hole too much. But look, we've seen some situations where incentives have become a big, big part of it, right? That's a big thing with the Eagles. So they have to plan for a lot of things that happen this time of year that roll into next year. That's a way to mitigate early salary cap situations, especially during the offseason. We've seen situations now a lot, actually. This is a growing trend where guarantees get stuck into next year, right? So if I don't plan on having this player 2 years down the road, I'm still going to throw a bonus that's guaranteed into that year, and we're going to call it a buyout. It's sort of the Major League Baseball scenario here, where I've got an option year with a buyout, and I'm just going to take that buyout and move on from the player. but it's a guaranteed salary that the player is still going to get. So there's some manipulation in that regard that I think is sort of fresh and new in the league that more and more teams are adopting. But look, what the Eagles are doing is pretty simple. Small contracts, really high guarantees, lots of cap deferrals so that everything looks fresh right now, but they're going to have to eventually take that on down the line. But they're winning Super Bowl, so they don't really care about that right now.
Well, and as far as just to kind of piggyback on Bob's question, like, is there something that comes out new that like, oh, this team is doing it this way, and who are you dealing with on the NFL side? Like, are you saying, hey, we're gonna, like you said, do a buyout or whatever? And, who is telling you, is there a slap on the wrist, or is there like, okay, no, you can't do that? I mean, it seems like it's kind of like the tax code.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it, right? So the CBA has some structure to it, but there are definitely scenarios where teams try different things, and the NFLPA and the league have to come together and say, is this something that we're going to allow? Not unlike Major League Baseball deferred money and things like that, right? It's an unwritten thing. It's try out, see how it goes, and if it gets through the window once, other teams will start to do it. I think it's just a matter of what can we get away with. That's certainly on the up and up in terms of an accounting structure. This is really just accounting. There's three sets of books, right? There's the cap now, there's the cap later, and there's the cash book. And it's really how well you understand your scenario with those books on a year-to-year basis. And unfortunately for Seattle, they have a situation where they're going to have to really maneuver some things this offseason just to get compliant.
Yeah, I was just looking at on your site, looking at the Eagles, and nobody's in double digits in the way of cap hit percentage. Like Jalen Hurts is at the top, and he accounts for, I think, 7.95% of the cap, where as you look at the Seahawks, you've got Geno, 16.18% of the cap. You got DK at 11.59, Tyler Lockett 11.23. So just to your point about what the Eagles do, yeah, the cap hits seem to be decidedly smaller in the way of a percentage. So when you look at the Seahawks, do you look at like those top three or maybe even top four with Draymond Jones, who's 9.33, and going, all four of those need to be adjusted in one way, whether they get released, whether they get extended and, pushed into bonuses and this, that, or the other? Is that how you view that?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So you're looking at the top of the cap tables for pretty much every team, and it's stay, go, extend, restructure. What's the word of the day for each player? And I think in this case, you might have a little bit of everything, right? Geno might get extended, DK might get traded, Tyler might get released, Draymond might get converted, restructured. It might be a whole bag of everything this offseason for the Seattle team, and certainly that process has already started with Leonard Williams. So, just to kind of compare it again, because I think this is something that's interesting for a lot of the fans that follow this stuff. So the Seattle's got these high cap hits. Philadelphia doesn't. Philadelphia bakes into the cake the restructure, right? They use option bonuses and tons of signing bonuses to just say, we know this player is going to be here for 3 years. We're going to be restructuring their contracts every year anyway. Let's just do it up front. Let's just build it in up front so that the cap hits are automatically low, whereas teams like Seattle have to sit here every February and March and say, all right, let's do this contract and this contract and this contract, and they take a more singular approach to that process.
So is Howie Roseman one of the better as far as manipulating all those numbers and things like that? Is that, could you credit him for, I don't want to say for the winning the Super Bowl, but is he one of those guys that does it the best?
Yeah, I'm not sure best is the right way to look at it. I think it's just aggressiveness. He in that Eagles ownership just have a simpatico right now that is, we're going to pay a lot of cash out every year. There's going to be a lot of bonus structures built into these things. Jalen Hurts is making upwards of $50 million cash this year, even though his cap hit's only going to be around $21 million. And that's just the way they're going to structure it. But, yeah, I think in this day, with the league salary cap up in the 270s, with the revenue streams of what they are, with all that in hand, and certainly with winning rosters and being able to draft well, which is something they've done, you just have the ability to say, we're just going to go at it 100 miles an hour every single offseason. And in that regard, I think he's one of the best in the league at doing that.
Do you usually see when a team gets in trouble, it's because of what they've committed to a quarterback? Because it seems like I'm looking at the two teams that have been listed behind the Seahawks, the Browns and the Saints. Deshaun Watson accounts for 26.52% of their cap, just him. He's got a $72.9 million cap hit this year. which is massive. And then you got Derek Carr, who accounts, I think, for 18%, a little over, of their cap. Is it usually about the quarterback, and is there a number you look at percentage-wise saying, there's always the complaint from fans, you can't commit X percent to one player and expect to win, and it's always the quarterback. Is there a percentage you attach to the quarterback saying, when you go beyond this, that's where it becomes a problem?
Yeah, I used to nerd out on this stuff quite a bit. There was a long time when the hard cap hit in 2010. There was like a 10-year stretch where that number for quarterback cap hits was 17%. That was the threshold that teams were trying not to go over, because for whatever reason, quarterbacks that were underneath that threshold and the roster you can build around it turned into some sort of playoff success, right? We're way past that. I mean, we've got cap hits. Patrick Mahomes was the number 2 cap hit in football when he won the Super Bowl last season. We've had a lot of iterations now where teams are just dealing with that on a year-to-year basis. But to your original point, which is, it looks like the teams that are in the worst cap spot have the biggest quarterback problems. It's not an accident. Number one, obviously those are the highest paid players on their team, so any of those cap hits are going to be troublesome right now. But also, it sort of takes everything else you're doing and puts it on pause. So where Seattle has already converted Leonard Williams money, the Browns are probably really hesitant to do anything with their salary cap right now, because they know that at least for the next year, they have to take on this ridiculous situation of Deshaun Watson's finances and just kind of purge and get through it. So there's a global hesitation when you have a quarterback contract problem on your roster that makes everything else sort of dialed back. And I think teams that feel good about themselves are going to have 9, 10, 11 players that get converted in a given year to free up as much cap space as possible, because there's just a lot more positivity happening within that front office.
Michael, it seems like a lot of people will speak about the salary cap with a lot of confidence. I feel like you're always very humble about it, which is why we have you on, because it's not like everybody understands exactly what's going on. And I think you've even said before, hey, this is my best shot here, and you're good at it. But what made you sort of get into that part of? I feel like it's harder than evaluating talent than as far as trying to figure out the. I feel like trying to figure out the cap is even harder. What made you want to get into that?
Yeah, I was big into the baseball stuff growing up, really big, like super nerdy out on the baseball stuff, and that was fun. And the tax stuff and all the luxury tax that came with that stuff, that was interesting. But then in 2010, when this NFL stuff got really, really intricate, I just dove into it and kept finding new ways that I things I didn't know and new ways to figure this stuff out. And it's been a long road since. I mean, we're 3 CBAs in, we're a lot of changes in, and a lot of things have come to the forefront that just keep this thing interesting. I'm literally learning stuff every month for the past 18 years regarding this NFL salary cap stuff. It just won't go away, and it won't stop. The train won't stop, as you know. So I appreciate that, but it's been a lot of fun.
Looking at what you have on the Seahawks, just looking at their page, total cap hit, you've got them third. Total cap space, they're 28th at negative $11 million. Is that, when you look at that number, do you feel like you're within the ballpark by, I don't know, I'm $5 million away, I'm one way or the other? Do you have really no idea how close you are or aren't to how far over the cap they are?
No, I'm pretty confident that the majority of these 60 contracts on the books here are within a couple thousand. There's been some incentive increases, especially with Geno Smith's big late run there, that may come back a little bit in terms of what's likely or not likely to be earned. But for the most part, we're pretty confident with these numbers, and a lot of it just, of course, stems on what the actual league salary cap ends up being. We're projecting 275 for the team salary cap right now. That may come down into the 273 mark a little bit, but pretty confident with the number as a whole, and we'll see where you end up in a couple of weeks here.
What do you think about running backs, Michael? It seems like they're trying to kind of make a comeback, and we always talked about how, I think they were the second least paid next to special teams players. And do you think that that's a trend that's going to start to maybe turn around from your perspective?
It's cyclical. There's no question about it. It has been for a while now, and we're certainly coming off a high right now. And unfortunately, I wish we had even one player that was going to keep this thing going in 2025. We just don't have that player eligible or available. But it's coming, right? We've got Jamar Gibbs, we've got Bijan Robinson, we've got some players, I think, this time next year that will be in the conversation for some sort of Jonathan Taylor cap-adjusted extension, right? So $15 million, $16 million a year. And as long as those things keep happening, I think things will really start to turn the corner. But there's no question that we just had maybe the best three-pack running back year of the hard salary cap era for the running back, and boy, do they need it, because you're right. It's kickers and punters, safeties, and running backs at the bottom three paid positions in football in terms of average salary.
Well, Dave doesn't think kickers or punters should make anything. So
come on now. They're not real football players, Michael. That's all I'm saying. No.
Hey, Michael, I'm curious. You said you kind of got your roots in following baseball and everything that was going on with that. I got to get your take on what the Dodgers are doing with deferring all of this money. I mean, they're signing these ridiculous contracts. I mean, they just signed Kike Hernandez over the weekend. They just keep adding and pushing that money down the road. Was that something that caught you by surprise, that was, I didn't realize they could do that? Or they're just the first to really take advantage of it in the way that they are? Or is this, do you look at this and go, boy, it's nice now, but down the road, they're in for a hellstorm? How do you view the whole Dodger thing?
So, again, it's been almost 20 years of following this stuff. There's a lot of teams that have been doing this for quite a long time. The Nationals have been really prevalent with these kind of contracts, deferred contracts. There's been a few teams out west that do this quite a bit. So it's not. This wasn't new. This didn't catch me off guard as, hey, what the heck is this? Now I got to learn something new. It just became a massive story because nobody has even come close to deferring, 95% of their contract like Shohei Ohtani did on a $700 million contract. So rightfully so, it's now completely in vogue, and we're just now noticing that, their right fielder, their left fielder, their first baseman, right? All these other players also have deferred contracts. So it's kind of just come out of the woodworks. I'll give you my honest opinion because I follow the structures of all of these leagues now and how these finances work. And a league like the NBA, which is so rigid and has so many rules and regulations, maybe too many, maybe a little bit too constricting. And then we've got baseball, which is still kind of the wild, wild west. And I will say this: the deferred money, it's no skin off my back. I understand the accounting part of it. I understand the tax part of it. I don't really agree with the fact that the Dodgers get this much of a tax credit throughout the contract. I understand that there's a present-day value and all of that, but I think that part of it needs to change. I don't believe that you should be able to pay somebody eventually $700 million, but only take on $46 million per year on your tax. I think that's incorrect. A lot of people have tried to equate that to what the NFL does with restructures, and that's not true. So all of this Jalen Hurts money that's being pushed down the line, eventually the Eagles are going to have to eat that salary cap. They're going to have to take that salary cap on. So it's a very different conversation. But the Dodgers, for Shohei Ohtani, over the course of the next 20 years, are only going to have to take on $460 million on their luxury tax payroll. And I don't think that part of it is correct right now. So I wonder if that comes up with this next iteration of the CBA, which is really just 18 months away now. But that's my take. It's been here forever. It's just kind of coming out of the woodworks now because it's been magnified with this Dodgers situation, and I think there may be a couple of tweaks that might come down the line here.
Well, you brought up the CBA that's coming up, and we've talked to former players who say every time those negotiations come up, the owners bring up the idea of a salary cap. The MLBPA says, nope, moving on.
Yep. And
it's just kind of a perfunctory thing they do every year. Do you think this thing with the Dodgers leads to anything like that? Any sort of constraints, or maybe a raising of the luxury tax, something that makes it more prohibitive from teams doing something like this? Or maybe they have a salary floor to combat teams like the Pirates and the A's for years? Or do you see anything changing, I guess, in the way of salary cap or salary floor as it pertains to baseball?
Yeah, I'm not a proponent at all of the salary cap. I will tell you, I've heard it much more than I've ever heard it, ramping up to this opt-out and this CBA stuff. So maybe there'll be something that at least gets discussed. I'm way in on the salary floor part of it. I do think there's a proponent there that should happen. And I get it. The small markets feel like even if they were being forced to spend, they just can't get players to come and walk in their door and sign a contract. And maybe that is a problem, but I'm not a salary cap fan. I'd like to see some of these small tweaks that I mentioned here with the deferred money, because I think it would bring things down to earth a little bit more, and what the bigger teams would have to take on an annual basis. But you're right. You're not wrong. We've been through 20 versions of this CBA negotiation stuff, and it really only takes 5 minutes for the Players Association to shut down a lot of the discussions and the conversations that we try to get to. So it's been a stalemate for a long time now.
Michael, you said you've been doing it for 18 years in the NFL. John Schneider's been there for 15 of those years. How would you, I don't know about rank or anything, but as far as the job that they do, with the salary cap, how do you look at them?
Right there. This is one of the first years that I think they've had a real struggle to get back to zero, the ground zero here with their salary cap, and it happens. It's an ebb and flow situation, but they are near the top of where I would say things have gone in terms of adjusting, changing, not going too crazy with this cap deferral stuff that we're talking about, taking it in small doses. I like the fact that every 2 to 3 years there's some sort of talk about extending players and that we're not getting into long terms. Like some other teams that are kind of stuck in the mud still do. So it's been a positive experience following this team and the salary cap. But I will say this is going to be one of the more aggressive off seasons that this team has had to go through in terms of their finances, and we'll see how it all shakes out.
Michael Ginnitt of Spotrac has been our guest here with Wyman and Bob, Seattle Sports on 710. Definitely head to Spotrac.com. It's a great resource. I mean, it's got every sport. Obviously, we're talking a lot of football and baseball, but it's got NBA. Everything you need to know about salaries and the teams you follow, the players you follow, it's right there. Really, really good stuff. Michael, as always, we appreciate you taking the time with us, my friend. Thanks so much for it.
Thanks for having me back. Appreciate it.